We have both been in the situation where we need a little bit of help for our parents. When my dad had COVID, my mom was by herself in independent living. That was not a good deal. I needed somebody. I needed somebody now.
Right.
And you've had the same thing with your mom.
Absolutely. We wanted just a little bit of help to be brought in, but trying to figure out how do you find it and how do you do it. So today we're going to talk to Stacy Scarborough, Visiting Angels, Georgetown, a home care agency. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Well, I think as Mike mentioned, sometimes you're in sort of crisis where you need somebody now, or sometimes it's like in my case with my mom, it was just a gradual noticing of, okay, we need to bring in and have a little bit more help. So, you want to bring in a non-medical caregiver. Where do you start?
Yes. So we actually come across this a lot as well. Typically, when you do want to hire a caregiver, it's quick, it's fast, you're in panic mode, you're overwhelmed, you're exhausted, you're not feeling good, right? So we always recommend talk to your family and friends who have used something like that, personal referrals. Word of mouth goes a long way. You're really going to get that honest perspective of somebody who's gone through it before you. Then you're going to take that list and maybe compare it to who your primary care physician might recommend. If you are currently in a healthcare system, maybe you've been in the hospital or you're at a rehab hospital, they do have social workers, case managers, or discharge planners. That's going to typically be very in touch with who's serving that area, what types of payment methods they take, their limitations, and give you a good list as well. So the key takeaway is start with a short list as you're gathering that information, and always call around to multiple options. That way you can get the benefits of each and get a better idea of who and what is the best fit for you.
I know that, our neighborhood, we have a really very active Facebook group that's just for our neighborhood. So a lot of times people ask questions like that. Obviously, our Parenting Aging Parents community, there are a lot of people who have had experiences that you could ask for questions too.
Yeah, but I know in my situation, my dad had to go to the hospital because he had COVID. This was about 3 years ago. And my mom was by herself, dementia level 5 stage 5 at that point. But I couldn't go up there. I'm 3 hours away for one. Number two, it was COVID time. Everything was locked up. I think my mom was actually positive too, even though she wasn't showing any symptoms. But I had no idea what to do. I need to get help for my mom. So I Googled and I tried to find somebody, and I made some calls, and it didn't help at all. So I didn't know what should I have done better.
Well, I think asking for those referrals, not just going straight to Google, but even once you get that short list, what kinds of questions should you ask?
Yeah.
Because a lot of times an agency might have some minimum required hours and things like that, right?
That's right. Yep. So your first step is when you do make those calls, who's answering, right? What home care agencies are answering in that first time that you call? What does the voice sound like on the other end? Are they patient and answering your questions? And you can tell that there's compassion on the other side of the phone. So that's step number one. You're going to get a real feel for how this group does business. Then you are going to want to ask questions. It's very normal to have that person on the phone be able to answer all of your questions. You shouldn't have to wait to schedule an in-person meeting or sign paperwork or sign up front before knowing how it works. So you should ask, what is the payment structure? What is the cost? Generally, it's based on an hourly rate structure. You want to ask, well, do you take alternative payment methods? Do you take long-term care insurance? Do you take the VA for veteran benefits? You want to ask, how do you hire your caregivers? Where do your caregivers come from? What are your credentials and your requirements for your employees? You want to be able to ask, are they available to call 24/7? So what if something happens and it is on a weekend or in the evening? Can I speak to someone in management? You also want to ask, what is their cancellation policy? Some agencies are going to be far more flexible than others. And as we know with healthcare, we really can't plan when we need to change our schedule or we do need to cancel or change our plan. So you really want someone that can be more flexible. So the cancellation policy, and then like you mentioned, a minimum. Do I have to sign up for a certain amount of hours on an ongoing basis? What if I only need it one day or a couple of weeks, can you
Mhm.
do a short-term
Mhm.
case?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Um,
And is that pretty common that most home care agencies will have some sort of minimum, whether it's hours at a specific, in a block of time where, it needs to be 4 hour shifts or something like that? Is that pretty common?
It is very common. So some do still have like a 1 hour minimum. So like Visiting Angels, we don't have one. We've never had one. But it is becoming far and far more common to have like a 4 hour minimum
Mhm.
where the caregiver can only see you in 4 hour blocks,
Mhm.
or it could be like a per week minimum. So you have to schedule 12 hours or 20 hours per week of care.
Mhm.
Would it be appropriate to also ask how much turnover they have with their caregivers? Because I know that in just today's world, in all kinds of service-based industries, restaurants, I would imagine in senior care too, we've heard that it's really hard to keep caregivers. So would it be helpful to know, how often, are you having to hire new ones? And would I see the same person likely, or would it always be a different person, or those kinds of questions too?
Yeah, I think even more helpful than the turnover question is, what is your staffing like right now? How well staffed are you? So how quickly can you start a case? If I call and I need help, what
Mhm.
does that turnaround look like? And then once I do start care, how well staffed are you to be able to send me the actual type of caregiver I need for the schedule that I need? And when you're more well staffed as an agency, that's what allows the flexibility, right? So you can change caregivers if it's not the right fit, or you can change the schedule, you can change the hours a lot easier when you have a much larger pool of caregivers to try.
Mhm.
Yeah. We were talking earlier about being in panic mode, and so many of us are in panic mode when we need some help. But we could plan ahead. If you know that your mom or your dad, they're doing okay now, but I think maybe in the near to distant future, maybe in 25, maybe in 26, they're going to need some help. Is it silly, or do I sound dumb if I call you and say, yeah, I think I may need some help in 2025. Can you give me some information? Is that something that's okay to do?
It is. We honestly really encourage it, because it's not like you're necessarily signing up for an actual schedule at that
Right.
point. You may be just preparing for the just in case, or you just had a situation that caused you to be pretty close to knowing that you need assistance. So it's got you thinking. Make that call, ask the questions, at least have that short list of options of, okay, I know if something happens again, I can give this list to my family members. I know these are the people I'm going to call to try first. A lot of agencies will allow you to pre-register, so you're just getting in their system with basic information. There's not a contract, and now you know at least the paperwork part is done. And then if you do call for assistance, then we just need to do the more specific care planning aspect of it and prepare for actual care to take
Yeah.
place.
One of the things that I ran into is that we only needed a little bit of help for my mom, uh,
Mhm.
someone to fill her pill box once a week, and then somebody really just to get eyes on her a couple of times a week. So, hiring an agency really probably didn't make as much sense because we just needed just a little bit of help. So in
Mhm.
my case, we were able to find a private caregiver who already worked in helping another woman in the independent living where she lived, and that's actually another place to be able to, I guess, ask for referrals
Yeah.
is if
Yes.
they're in independent living, because there oftentimes are either agencies that might be coming in and or private caregivers who already sort of help a couple of people a little bit. So that ended up being a really great fit for us. And sometimes people do like that, very personal, want to be able just to hire one person to help them. So when you're going down that road, what suggestions might you have? I know that when I, contacted or got in touch with the woman who is the caregiver that helps my mom now, I was able to call another family and get a referral from them,
Check
Mhm.
reference.
check the reference, if you will.
Mhm.
So what are some of the other things if I just think I really would rather just have a private caregiver, what do I need to take into consideration and how do I do that?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing there would be there can be some flexibility with having a private caregiver, right? So you're not answering to an agency. So just knowing if I'm going to hire privately, then who in the family or in the care circle is going to be kind of that manager and that coordinator? Is there somebody that can take on that responsibility to provide some type of oversight? So who's going to do the interviewing? Who's going to pay the caregiver? Accounting for, taking out taxes where that agency would do all of that for you. Who's going to be the one in communication with the caregiver to coordinate schedule, or providing a backup plan if that private caregiver becomes unavailable? Is there somebody else willing to kind of be that backup or that sub? Absolutely, you want those personal recommendations. And I recommend seeing them in action, right? So just a sit down, formal interview with a private caregiver and asking questions will help you, but it's only going to get you so far. You want to be able to have that person actually in the home and providing some care and really see their demeanor and how they might approach things, and have somebody else there to, of course, help that client feel comfortable.
Yeah. We have so many people in our Facebook group, it seems, that post every week about, I need somebody to check on my mom just 3 or 4 times a week, just for a couple of hours or something like that. Not 9 to 5 type of thing, but still not a little bit more than Kim's mom. For those people, and they're always asking, what do I do? Who do I look for? Real quick rehash. What's the 1 or 2 or 3 things that the first things they should do to find somebody?
So to find somebody, you want to ask your friends and family. You want to ask the medical professionals that you trust and that know your situation. If you are in a senior community, typically the management there is going to have a pretty good sense of who's in their building, who does a good job, who has a good reputation or has availability. So you want to go to those trusted sources and always compare and talk to multiple agencies. Create that list of what's important to you, so you can see just those slight differences may make a big difference in what causes you to go one way or the other.
And is there kind of I know this is a little bit of a loaded question because it varies a lot depending on what part of the country you're in, what part of the state you're in, where you live, just what the economy is where you live. Is there a difference in cost a lot of times between a private caregiver versus an agency, and or just to even give people just a ballpark of what you might expect to pay? And I know that it's going to differ depending on where you live specifically.
Yeah, so typically whether it's private or home care agency, you are paying an hourly rate. So the difference is with an agency, there is going to be a slightly higher cost because you're paying for that agency to be bonded and insured and licensed. So you're getting a caregiver that's been vetted and insured. Rather than private, you're on the hook for if something goes wrong. Yeah. So that is, of course, a benefit, right? To private caregiving, you can generally save, a couple dollars. I'd say kind of overall in the market right now, you're looking at paying on average, anywhere from $25 to $40 an hour for caregiving.
Yeah, and that could depend, again, depending on what part of the country you're in. If you're in New York City versus small town or something like that.
Yes.
So in some ways too, if you're looking for some of that additional, just like maybe just need a little bit of help, maybe it's even asking around in your neighborhood. Is there a stay-at-home mom who would like to be able to, help go check on your mom? Because for those families who have a loved one who still lives in their own home, that I think is probably harder because you don't already have people in the building, if you will, that are helping to provide some of that care. Yeah. So I think it's just kind of asking around and sometimes it's just being creative. I mean, just like we did potentially with our kids, with our babysitters, we had to get super creative because of our really weird work schedule. So we pieced together some really crazy, crazy stuff. So I think it's just kind of trying to get a little bit creative. Yeah. So are there any, just quickly, just kind of like pros and cons of, agency versus private caregiver and private caregiver versus, compared to agency?
Yeah. So pros and cons, they both have them, right? So it's really what's important to you, what has to be a priority. We all have a budget, right? So there can be a cost difference. There can be an oversight difference, right? With home care, you're paying for those caregivers to already be vetted and to have oversight. So you have that liaison in between you, and it serves as that buffer. So if there are concerns, if there are issues, you have someone to go to and to answer to who can solve that problem for you. And of course, the number one perk of a home care agency is those caregivers are bonded and insured. So whether there's theft or a lamp gets broken, the caregiver gets injured on the job, they're going to have workers' compensation insurance. So you're protected that way. As well as you have a group to call upon for backups and subs. So if your regular caregiver is unavailable, you can call that agency typically round the clock, 24/7, and they can supply you with a backup caregiver so that you're not stuck.
And as you mentioned too, some of it depends on what you really need help with. I knew that for my mom, filling her pill box was going to be really important. And maybe we should touch on this just briefly, that,
Yes.
because of licensing, a home care agency or a home care caregiver can't fill a pill box because then you need home health. So in that, so I guess it's also just, that's another example, I guess, of just the importance of knowing what kind of help do they really need, and remembering that all of this home care help, whether it's a agency or a private caregiver, is going to be private pay, right? Because I think a lot of people just have the idea that, oh, Medicare or some pays for this, and this is that additional non-medical care, right?
That's right. So private pay out of pocket. A long-term care insurance will typically cover home care agencies. That's something else to consider with home care versus private, is to find out if your long-term care agency will even allow you to hire private. A lot of them will have a rule that it has to go through an agency because, again, you're more protected that way.
Okay.
As well as through the VA. So if you're a veteran and you do have benefits that will pay for some home care hours, the VA does require that it's an agency.
Okay,
and it has to be an agency contracted with the VA, not just anybody. So that they would give you a list of who has that contract.
Okay, good to know. Yeah, good to know. So just, I think it's just having to really sit down, and hopefully this really helps educate people in a way that they at least, sort of know the questions to be asking themselves and to be asking of an agency or a private caregiver so that they can make these decisions.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Knowledge is power.
Exactly.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Stacy Scarborough with Visiting Angels Georgetown. Thank you so much. I think you've calmed the panic mode that a lot of people are in as they're looking for help.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.
Yeah.
Good. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's something that we all just need to know, almost make a list of what you need, what you can get. And like I said, it's kind of sounds silly, but plan ahead when you can. Even though mom or dad are fine right now, maybe not in the future. And if you know in the future, it's kind of like we've talked about college. Let's plan for college way ahead of time. Well, same thing here. Let's plan ahead of time.
Just knowing what the process is that you'll go through makes it so much easier. And even just understanding what it actually is the first step too.
Yeah. Hey, if you have any other topics you'd like us to discuss, please let us know. Parenting aging parents.